All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. So let's get started. This is the Carpenter Working Group. So we'll just go through the agenda. Let me share my screen too so that everyone can see what's happening. Okay. Um, so let's start with the project updates. One quick call out that I have here is that we just released 1.6 earlier this week. So if you haven't had the time to use that yet, I'd recommend upgrading. We have a bunch of really cool, exciting features. So definitely looking for you all to try it out and share any feedback that you might have. Any other updates that anyone wants to share?
Nothing on our side, but also huge congratulations to AWS on, IKEA's Ultra as well, where I think Carpenter plays a large role as far as I can tell. So great job, guys.
Yep, definitely. I think the team has been hard at work. So yeah, congrats on that launch to everyone involved. All right, moving on. I'm gonna fill out the attendees thing later. Any RFCs that we want to discuss today? Can move on to community questions. Almiko, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I was having some discussions internally here with like kind of some of our internal users slash customers. And there had come up a question about like how to limit the actual node count that Carpenter is creating. And so like I was looking at the node pool specification, and I could see how you can limit each node pool on the number of total resources it can create. But is there a way to limit the actual node count? And I ask this because we were discussing some scenarios where, like, say the user says, okay, I want to make sure that my users never make more than a 500 node cluster. Because my control plane is set up in a way where, if I go over 500 nodes, I'll start to have problems, or I'll start to experience, support issues on my control plane. And then another scenario that one of the people I was talking to was talking about was a scenario where they had like a limited subnet, and they would only be able to make like up to 100 nodes on the subnet before they would have to do something with the networking to kind of change things over. So they wanted to know, is there a way that like you could put a limitation on Carpenter to say, okay, regardless of what else is going on, don't make more than like this many nodes or whatever. And I see Garvin has a suggestion in chat here. You could use node as the resource limit.
Yeah, I think so. Previously, I used pods, but I think we messed around with nodes. And I think when I was looking at the code, it's relatively generic. Like the resource, I think it's using the Kubernetes like resource. I forgot what the name of the type is, but I think if you put node, it does stop it after it reached the number of nodes, at least in the node pool.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. Yeah, that might be a really easy fix for us. I appreciate that, Garvin.
I'm trying to remember because my first reaction was "Hey, we don't support it," but then I think maybe with some changes we made, we might accidentally support it. Like I think one of my response was, "You think this is?" It's tough to support one because it's for a reason about for like a heterogeneous set of instance types. Although I agree, like the use cases make sense, and then two, I think it was just like it's a bit more complicated than it kind of first appears because you kind of have to start thinking about how consolidation affects things and how do you make decision like if you were to have a smaller instance type and then you had pods come in, you maybe have to consider how do you consolidate the existing node into being a larger instance type so you could support those pods. Whereas today I think we just hard block it. So I think there's some interesting questions there. If we do accidentally support it, I think I would just say it's like, well, if it does accidentally work, we don't necessarily directly support it. So there may be some sharp edges there that we need to work out before I'd say we would recommend it.
Yeah, I guess at a high level, do we even do anything? So let's say you put a limit on pods, right? We don't do anything around that, but nodes, I guess, is slightly different. Um, yeah, okay. I need to give that some thought too. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jonathan, to your points about like the complexity of this, yeah, like I totally get it. And I've been having this conversation internally because, we have one set of users who are like, okay, the expectation is I can set the count of nodes, to this or that. And I'm like, okay, y'all need to back off a little bit because Karpenter is different than that. So I'm trying to explain the kind of resource levels and whatnot. And, we could probably do some things to work around this where we say, okay, if you don't want more than 100 nodes, we know what type of nodes those were. We could just say 100 times that memory, 100 times that CPU. But then the questions started to come up where they say, well, we've only done support tests around, this many max nodes on the control plane. And so if we go above this number of nodes, that might affect our SLOs or our SLAs, getting to things in the cluster. Um, but yeah, I totally appreciate that. I guess for next steps here, like, should I maybe open up an issue with like a feature request or something? Or what would be the best way to continue the discussion, I guess?
If I remember correctly, there is one. I'm not on my computer right now, so I'd have to track it down, or maybe somebody else on the team could. But I think there is one there, and I think Garvin, you're right. Like technically, this exists with CPU. Like the consolidation problem exists with CPU and memory today. So I think it really was how do I reason about this when I have 50 different instance types in my node pool, and could I get like locked up if I have like accidentally provisioned a bunch of really small instance types? And then I set a relatively low node limit. I think the use case in general makes sense, but I think we need to like do a little bit of work to avoid the sharp edges. And for what's worth, we also kind of had to think about this when it came to EKS Ultra, actually. Just like thinking about like when there are etcd limits, um, how do we handle this kind of thing? So I do think the use case is relevant. I just think we needed to do a little bit of thinking.
Yeah, that sounds good. And like, I'm happy to help with the thinking and the collaboration and whatnot. So maybe as a next step, yeah, I'll just oh, thank you, Sarov. Yeah, maybe as next steps, I'll just continue the discussion on that issue. And then we can maybe focus there and figure out if there's something we can do. Because right now I have a feeling we're going to be doing some automation on our end where it's like looking at the number of node claims that are out there and then having it like pause Karpenter if it's getting too big or something. Like I don't know what we're gonna do, but the workarounds are gonna be way hackier than I think they probably should be. Thanks everybody. I appreciate the discussion.
Yeah, I think while I was searching for this, I also found it interesting that there's like a feature request which basically asks us to support limiting node pool by dollars. So maybe you just want to put an upper bound on, how much a node pool can end up costing you. So I think like there's a general theme of, being able to support different kind of limits. So yeah, I think like maybe you should come up with a more generic way to do this.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate the consideration. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. All right. The next item as joint documentation efforts. Did anyone want to talk about this?
Yeah, I put it on the agenda. So I think we started thinking about this a while ago, and there were some discussions going around, how we can put up a website where there will be kind of the shared common configuration and maybe per provider documentation as well. And it didn't go anywhere, so I thought we should restart those discussions, and I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on, how we could go about this, or what you think, the website might look like, or anything else. I know Bryce reached out with some questions on this as well, but I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks about, how the website might look, how we can carve out I don't know, maybe like drop down boxes for, or maybe, per provider areas or in some other way. Yeah. Any thoughts, any feedback on that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. Jonathan, I know you responded to the thread in the Kubernetes Slack channel. And I remember you had some suggestions. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think I kind of expressed that. Um, I think so. On one hand, it's like I'm not 100% sure that this is going to be doable, just because of the number of areas that we may have to create divergence inside of the documentation.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I think it may be worth a good try, an attempt, kind of my fact. And I think if somebody was willing to work of like making changes to make it Azure specific, so I was kind of thinking like, okay, if we can have somebody kind of own the attempt at creating that kind of shared documentation with a little bit of divergence here and there, we can at least take a look at it and like see, okay, does this make sense? Is there a reason to do this that doesn't confuse users? Or is this just not going to be possible, period? And we just accept the fact that we will diverge. I don't love it because I think we do get like any upstream update, we have to like propagate it throughout, and then we have to like, we basically don't get those changes for free. If somebody makes an update, we have to like do it everywhere. So that was kind of my feedback to Bryce. Is if Bryce is owning like the process of getting these docs up, or if there's somebody on the Azure side that's owning the process of getting these docs up, might be worth getting like a brief POC out with the changes to see if it does work. I don't know, Alex, what your thought is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably a couple of stages there, like having a variant that customizes the same docs for Azure. We probably already have something like a PR for that Bryce cooked up for like the Azure providers. So that might be a first step to see which areas need customization. I don't know if it's already obvious or if like taking a look at that might be helpful. And then the next stage sounds like thinking through how do we organize those subsets that need to be changeable within the website, whether it's like a drop down switchable boxes or subsets or subsections of the website. So I think we already have something, or like can easily have the phase one of this, just so that we can compare. The phase two, yeah, that's obviously a bit more complicated. Um, if we were to go for this and we were to find a way to share documentation with like switchable areas. As far as placement, what are you thinking, Jonathan? Like, would it be like an upstream in the core repo or a separate documentation repo, or how would you want to organize that?
Yeah,
Assuming it's
I mean, I
possible,
think
right?
it would. Yeah, I think it would either go in the upstream repo or it would have to go in a separate repo, but still in like Kubernetes SIGs, like
Mhm.
um, probably just in the upstream repo, I would imagine.
Right. And another question maybe to the community. I know this has been raised in the past and we didn't make a lot of progress, but are there good examples, like reference examples for this kind of thing? It feels like there should be, but I suspect maybe there's like more than one pattern. So the question is, does anybody know for like good examples that we might want to follow or imitate?
I know that Cappy is kind of maybe, I don't know if Elmico thinks it's a counterexample or an example. I'm not sure. I know we talked a little bit about like the fact that, we think there's some good things about it and maybe some not so good things about it. I'm also curious if we talked to SIG Docs last time. Like, did we talk to anyone in the Docs community that might have an opinion about how this could work?
Yes, I believe so. I think the conversation has started, and the complexity was enough probably to so that the conversation ground to a halt. Um,
Hmm. Did
but
they
it,
did they have an opinion about like, oh, this isn't something that makes sense? Like, I'm genuinely curious like what they think, because I think if we can get like a definitive answer on like, okay, we think this is a really bad idea and we just shouldn't do it, then I'm more
Mhm.
comfortable with like saying, okay, let's diverge. Or I just think those people obviously have more experience in creating documentation, and um, like we can And they'll have more, I guess, examples to pull from.
Yep, it's a good reminder. Yeah, we can both dig out those threads and maybe restart the conversation with the SIG docs. Okay.
So yeah, just a comment, I guess. Like I agree with what Jonathan was saying about the cluster API stuff. Like there are some good parts of it, but there are also some parts of it that I think probably don't serve what we're trying to do here. I also totally agree with like reaching out to SIG docs about this and just seeing if they have some best guidance. Something that I wanted to suggest, and when Alex started to talk about good patterns for this, it kind of reminded me again of it. We might also consider doing a model where it's like we have the central doc site that's kind of like applicable for all carpenters, covers the core concepts and everything. And then, we could, in the same place, we could make like kind of a toolkit or a template that providers who want to spin off their own docs, they could refer to the core docs for the core concepts, but then we could give them kind of a template that they could use to start making their own thing at their own site. And that way, we would be able to have some amount of centralization for some of the core parts, but we could help people with the structure on the provider specific bits. And then without having a singular doc site, we could help to make a little bit of consistency for people who wanted to use, kind of the examples or the templates that we put forward. So that might be another way that we could look at this, where we could, have all the central concepts in one place, but then give providers a helping hand, as it were, so they can get their own, documentation started and, those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I'd be a little bit concerned that, there are ways to implement what you're describing in a way that like requires replication and could cause like divergence over time and, having to maintain it in a couple of places. So, which would be good to avoid. But I think there are ways to do what you're suggesting, like that, this doesn't happen. So, okay, that's all good feedback. Yeah, I'm looking forward to us solving this, one way or another. So, thank you.
Right, good discussion. Thanks for bringing this up, Alex. Moving on to the next one, and John, I think you added this. Wanna
Yes,
talk?
I did. And we don't have to have like the big long discussion today. That's not what I'm going for. So at the very bottom, I added like kind of like a really long comment with like some diagrams and things. And so basically, I know that Jonathan's here and I know he's been talking with Alberto about some of this. And so like maybe like a month ago, we were like, hey, we're gonna go dig into this and like look and see what we can come up with and see if there's maybe like an elegant way to make it so that like, you can manage your guest cluster with Karpenter from kind of your management cluster in like a namespace. And like, I mean, Karpenter's just really not set up right now the way to do that the way that we want. And so like we're trying to come up with like maybe a more elegant way of doing it. But like right now the proposal would be pretty much, hey, go refactor like all of the Karpenter controllers to do it. And so like I mean I don't know, like that's kind of why it's been like we'll say quiet, is because we're still kind of like working on it and like hunting that. So Jonathan, I don't know. I mean you've been talking with Alberto about it. And I saw your comment and that's what kind of prompted. I didn't want to just be like totally silent, but it's like it's I don't know that there's, we'll say, a super elegant like way through that right now. So I felt
Yeah.
like if I go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think I lost some context because it's been a minute. So I mean, besides like obviously looking at it fairly recently, I was trying to remember like what the architecture was. Like I think that was my main issue, is I didn't fully understand the architecture y'all were trying to achieve. I know y'all are a
Okay.
service provider and you're obviously trying to like wrap effectively some of the
Yeah.
AWS provider or any of the different providers. Is that basically right? Like you're trying to hide some
Yeah,
details.
I kind of and so it's the there's this sort of like we kind of run we kind of run Carpenter in kind of this like namespace, like we have a management cluster that has a bunch of namespaces in it, and then we kind of run like say Carpenter in that namespace, and it like manages kind of that guest cluster. So we kind of have like this big management cluster that manages like a fleet of like kind of guests, and so like turning Carpenter directly over to, we'll say, the owner, the administrator of that guest cluster, and letting them manipulate like all of it is potentially like dangerous, because that has like, we'll say big management cluster, like resource cost concerns, whatever. And so it's it's kind of the like splitting it out so like the user could still interact with Carpenter, to get what they want in terms of like node pooling and scaling and things like that, but also like not upset kind of like the service provided or the management cluster. And so like hopefully like I feel like the pictures I put in there then, that given what you said, like would potentially like kind of help visualize what we're going for.
Mhm.
And maybe why. But like I was saying, it's because I mean right now like all of the types are cluster scoped, right? And so when you're doing kind of like that manager that managed cluster thing, you want to like stuff Karpenter into kind of that namespace, and so you kind of have this, it's really like not set up for that right now, like I'm saying. So I don't know. I I feel like it's a hard sell to be like, hey, like let's just go rewrite Carpenter to do what we want. So like, I mean, something a little more elegant is I feel like necessary there. So that's like that wasn't like radio silence. That was more like, oh, well, this is maybe going to take some doing.
Yeah, I guess what I'm curious about is like you're hiding away all the configuration, right? I mean, so who has access to this management cluster?
That would be, we'll say like platform administrators, like we'll say the folks handing out the service to the customer would be kind of how that works. So like if you scroll up to like I think the third diagram, that one. Okay.
Mm.
So like if you look here, we've kind of got like, you know, ideally it's you'd hide your actual node claims, node pools, EC2 node class in the namespace. So like, the platform administrator could see it and see what was going on, whatever. But like the user like should be able to like see it and manipulate some of it, but maybe like not upset the apple cart, right? Like they should see Carpenter doing Carpenter stuff and scaling and doing what it wants, and they should be able to manipulate some fields. But like kind of like Mike was talking earlier about like limiting like resources, size of node pools, things like that. Like it's maybe you want to set like a hard cap on that or something that like would be immutable. But that like on the platform side you could change, but maybe the user couldn't change, things like that. So it's kind of a like separate that so they can use it, but they can't destroy it, maybe, if that makes sense. Right? Like I don't necessarily want them going and like, I'm gonna go delete this node claim, or I'm gonna go manipulate it, or I'm gonna go mess with, the EC2 node class. I'm gonna put some stuff in there. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't put stuff in there. Maybe we should give you a list of stuff that's in there and you can change some aspects of it, but not all of it.
There may be some use cases for this for scenarios for managed control plane as well, where maybe like the node pools are not directly controlled by the customers, but they become instantiated based on some secondary configuration. Um, I don't know if it would take exactly this shape, but it sounds like this kind of thinking could be useful in this space.
Well, yeah, and that's why like I don't necessarily want to be prescriptive. Like, I mean, there's potentially a lot like different ways we could do this. So like that's why I hesitate to be like, no, this is like our hard proposal. It's more okay, like yeah, like multi-cluster runtime. Oh yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I
I
didn't.
I
I
totally need to mess with
think
that. No, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, I think
That's
you mentioned like two bigger problems. So I
yeah.
did remember like looking at this particular project, and I think this came up in a discussion maybe a few weeks ago, but this could potentially at least help with the second problem that you mentioned here.
Yeah, so that would be cool. I feel like I don't know, the types currently being cluster scoped. I mean we could okay, we could cheat. We could solve that by like just applying them like in a namespace fashion, and then like but then you'd have to like inject namespaces into controllers and stuff like that. I mean there's ways to do that without a ton of change. If we could solve, we'll say, the multi-cluster part. So I don't know. So I think we got options. That was just I just didn't want you to think that we had like given up or anything. I felt like I saw Jonathan's comment. I was like, no, like we still want to do it. It's just we hadn't chased it all into a corner yet.
Yeah, I think I'm just so if I'm understanding, I'll have to read through this a little bit more in detail, like after this meeting maybe, but um, it's basically like I mean, I think we're back to maybe the same conversation we had like when we had this conversation a few weeks ago. Like are we talking about like a read-only version of the resource that is like you're saying, like the projected version of the resource that's a user can just see for visual visibility, but like can't change? But I think there's also another scenario where they can change some details of it, but can't change others.
Yeah, I would say our desire would be that they could change some of it. Like rather than have to have a completely like we'd want, I mean, I feel like you'd want the interface to be vaguely Carpenter-ish, right? Like I mean ideally it'd be like one to one, but like I mean they only should be able to manipulate parts of it. So like if they're familiar with Carpenter, okay, and you could like project those types, they could still read Carpenter doc, do Carpenter things with maybe some limits. And so then, so that would be like ideal. But so it wouldn't be just read only, it'd be potentially like they could manipulate part of it, but we could put some kind of guardrails around that. And it wouldn't be completely different than Carpenter, right? I mean, we can make like a totally different set of types, and we could like make some controller that like reconciles those to the Carpenter types. But like keeping that interface, we'll say, as close to Carpenter as possible, I think has value. Like that's why we'd want to do it that way, where it'd be like if you know how to use Carpenter, like potentially you can use it here like this.
If you wanted to keep a one-to-one with Carpenter, could you use something like Kyverno or something to set like policies on what the users in the guest cluster could modify on like node pool and node class CRDs?
You can, but the problem is that they like the guest cluster administrator more or less has like they have administrator to, we'll say, that cluster and its resources. And so like I mean, like right now we have like a validating admission policy on some of it. Okay, cool. Well, they can go delete the validating admission policy and then
Right.
they can go manipulate it. And so that's the problem, right? They have like too much power for their local cluster, but like you know what I mean? Like they can
Yeah.
manipulate
Okay.
too much there, and that's why like the permission problem is there. I think Mike, you had your hand up.
I mean, I gotta drop for another meeting, unfortunately. But I was just gonna say, to Jonathan was saying, he wanted to look into this a little more. I just want to say, I think a good example of this is if you look at like the EKS node class as opposed to the EC2 node class, and how if I'm an EKS user and I'm using Carpenter there, there are some different assumptions about the way the EKS node class works and how some values are not expressed to the user there, and they're injected by like other configuration means and whatnot. I think that's kind of the activity that we're looking into. But what we're trying to solve for as well is like the notion that if a user has admin credentials to the cluster, even if we put like a validating admission policy or something in place, they could still attempt to race the cluster to make changes that could be detrimental. So we're trying to figure out if there's a way to absolutely close that door, from a security standpoint. And I hate to make a comment and rush off, but like I have to go, unfortunately. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say oh, hold on, sorry. I was gonna say for what it's worth, I think we like the EKS node class that you're mentioning, Amiko, is like the model there is actually like single cluster access. So we're talking about like a single kube config that's pointing at both the configuration objects and the pods and the nodes. So, but I think we discussed this when we first had this conversation like a month or two ago. Like I think that we also have this problem of like, okay, we've applied these node pools or these node classes to the customer cluster, and they're being modified when we don't want them to be, because there's some pre-configuration that exists, or we know that the customer can break themselves in some weird way if they do that, and we can't basically maintain like a service bar if the customer can change these things.
Yeah, you get it.
So it's like I struggle to see like I get the use case. I'm still like on the bandwagon of like, okay, this is truly just an RBAC problem.
Yeah, fair. I mean,
It's tough.
that's just like in my mind that like I totally get it, and like yeah, it could just be an RBAC problem. Where we run into issues is that like when we make it just an RBAC problem, then the security folks who are looking for like a higher level of security, they're like, well, make it not an RBAC problem. So
That's
unfortunately,
fair.
that's a totally different discussion, but yeah, I appreciate all the attention and thought that's going into this though.
So maybe the proposal here is we need like a milestone based concept of like how we're going to kind of maybe short term solve this problem and long term solve this problem. Yeah, I mean, I think I remember the proposal as it was stated was, I don't know if it takes changing like everything, right? It's just changing the client in like a few different places, if I remember correctly. Well, I guess the client in so much when it's accessing certain resources. So I guess it does touch a lot of things, but yeah, it might be, I guess we kind of have an initial discussion going. I know we had originally talked about like, okay, do we go to, SIG Auth or SIG Security and kind of like track down some people that might have more thoughts on the RBAC conversation? I don't know where that went. Did we get anywhere with that or not?
I don't know there was ever a follow-up there. That's probably something we should talk to them about though. I'll make a note to go like kind of follow up there, and I'll talk with John afterwards. Unfortunately, I really got to run now, but appreciate it.
Well, no, well, thanks for talking through this, I guess. I appreciate it. And like I said, I didn't want you to think we'd like abandoned it. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. What's the next step here? Like, do we know like if someone is like talking to upstream?
Yeah, Mike and I'll talk after this. We'll go talk to SIG Author, wrangle some RBAC stuff, kind of go along that angle, and then I was gonna try multi-cluster runtime and kind of come up with a minimal, like a hey, here's the thing that would kind of make it work sort of thing if we wanted to like see it, assuming that works. And then yeah, I feel like those two kind of prongs, and then we'll kind of come back and see what we got.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I have the next one. And I feel like we could just, talk about this forever, but I mostly just wanted to bring this up because I'm seeing a lot of confusion around disruption budgets. And I know there's some historical context here where we used to support disruption budgets without like a specific reason or disruption reason, and then now we have supported reasons. So a lot of customers seem to be confused by the fact that sometimes you have nodes getting disrupted due to things that are outside of that region. Like a classic case is if your nodes expire, they seem to still count under the disruption budget, even though like you might specify your budget as, hey, you know what, like only do it for consolidation, or this is my budget for drift, and this is my budget for consolidation. So mostly just wanted to get some historical context around how we have been thinking about this and see if we can get some of this confusion out of the way. So I see that Jonathan drop, Jason, Emmanuel, since you guys are here, um, do you mind just like providing some background about this? I think you're on mute if you're speaking.
I guess, are you just like looking for like generally how to do it?
Yeah, I think mostly, again, I don't want to spend up a lot of time. I just thought it would be good to bring this up for discussion. But like, how do we think about disruption budgets? Like, I know we support disruption budgets for different reasons, but like under the hood, like, or conceptually, do we still consider any disruption to be a part of the disruption budget?
Yeah, at a high level, when you look at the calculation for like disruption budgets, it's the overall cluster, right? Like it's not like 10% of nodes are being disrupted for consolidation. It doesn't count that way. It counts as there's 10% of nodes being disrupted right now. Therefore, all the budget, if your budget is 10%, then there's no budget left to do anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it kind of does, but I totally see the confusion because I don't think like we call it that way in our docs. So I think a lot of users just think that, okay, if I set my disruption budget to like 10% for drift, then it should allow 10% of my nodes to be drifted, even though they might be, still getting disrupted for some other reasons.
Well, so I guess, so we have a default budget, right? So a default budget without any reasons encapsulates everything. And so if you have different reasons, um, those will fall under that bucket. However, what we do look at is the most restrictive budget. So in the sense that, say you have your 10%, but then you say I'm gonna give like generally I have 10%, but then if you say I'm gonna give 50% for drift, you have to make sure you're opting it out of that 10%, like general bucket, because that's the most restrictive bucket. And so I think that part can be a little confusing. I mean, we can take a look at the docs and see if we can make the wording improvements. To me, at least what I've seen is around the actual scheduling and the duration. That's where most people kind of get confused because that cron is it is it's a I don't it's not a weird semantic once you understand it, but it is a little difficult.
Is that true? I thought once you apply any sort of budget, it no longer falls into that 10%. It assumes no unlimited budget. Once you add any form of budget for reasons, then that 10% default no longer applies to any other reason. Because I thought that default is if you didn't specify any budget, period.
Yeah, I
It should
thought
be
that
the
was
most
the case as
restrictive.
well.
As far as I'm understanding, it should be the most restrictive budget is the one that we
Well,
use.
I think what Garvin's getting at, and I believe this is the case as well, is if you apply any budget, so if you apply like just a budget for drift, we no longer apply that default 10% universal budget. That default one is only applied if that field is truly empty. Maybe we did something special for reasons that I'm just not aware of, where if you specify something with a reason, it doesn't override that default. But generally speaking, for example, like if you just went and applied like an 80% budget, that would override the 10%. That 10% would no longer be the most restrictive because we only apply it when that field is fully empty.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I saw at least some of the users running into. So they basically had like a drift budget, and then for some reason their nodes also expired, and now they're not getting their nodes drifted at all because the expiration is kind of counting in that budget. And I was just wondering, like, I totally see both sides of the coin here, wherein like some customers do want to control the total number of disruptions regardless of why it happened. But then, I mean, if you are, for example, trying to consolidate around the same time that, let's say, your army drifted, then like effectively your consolidation could take a really long time to happen. Um, I was wondering, like, if there's value for us to just allow users to control this, wherein like it's okay for my nodes to still be disrupted for consolidation, even if there is some other, disruption method taking down some of the nodes.
I want to say it's been a while since I like did anything in the disruption thing. I want to say the calculation for that's much more difficult, but I have to revisit the design doc. I think that was one of the considerations originally for the disruption budget, but I think it was too confusing or too complicated. Maybe it having two different modes makes sense, but then I feel like that's even more confusing. But we can I can take a look at the budget design doc again to see if we wrote anything down around that. But I think the main thing was it's too confusing. And leaning on it being safer, meaning more restrictive in that it's the budget, it's the whole thing being disrupted, and that's how budget's calculated. It was simpler in terms of like understanding and simpler to implement, but I don't see why not necessarily to do it the other way. Yeah. But we need some time to figure that out.
Yeah, no, that's where I think I just
Yeah.
wanted to get the conversation started. I'm still diving into all of the different scenarios, so I'll probably try to put up like a short document, just giving us a clear understanding of what we do today, and then what we could potentially do. Because I feel like, again, like you said, I mean it could be confusing either way, but I still feel like either we have to like improve our docs to like really clearly call out what's happening or what to expect, or just allow customers to have more control. So I'll take the next steps on this one. Maybe come up with like a short RFC or something if I decide to put out a proposal.
I did add on the Zoom link chat a link. I opened an issue. I think we talked about it. I forgot where or when. Around like improving the visibility of budgets, where maybe as part of no pull status, I don't know where necessarily, where we essentially render the full budget for the user to see so that it explicitly lists out, hey, for consolidation, for emptiness, for everything that you didn't add in your budget necessarily, it also shows there's like, hey, here's actually what your budget looks like for the time intervals, so that at a glance you understand the full explicit budget that you actually rendered, even though you didn't explicitly do all the things when you specify the budget. And maybe that'll be easier to understand what's going on. And then from there, maybe user will tune their budget a little bit better because they now understand what's going on at a glance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I linked it in the doc as well as a reference link. But yeah, I'm going to go through that proposal after the meeting. I definitely feel that we could use some more improvements in terms of like how users can like clearly understand, even if something is not working, like if you know your budget is if you think like Carpenter should be disrupting something, but it's not because of the budget, I don't think there's a easy way for the user to like really figure out what happened. All right. I think I have the next steps here. So I don't want to take up too much time given that we have a few more items. So moving on to the next one. Derek, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so this is an issue we got in the AWS provider repo, but it's about Carpenter Core itself. So I figured we might bring it up here. The issue that the customer's seeing is basically excessive churn when it comes to consolidation. I can explain the setup they've got, but at the outset, the kind of information I'm looking for is, have other folks seen this? What's the kind of like, it, you know, what's the kind of like expected behavior here? And then I have some proposed solutions that I want to like run by some folks. So what they're essentially seeing is when you have like a workload that scales up and scales down frequently, you'll end up provisioning this like extra node on the side, and then due to consolidate after, it doesn't need to be consolidated after, it can also be just like node time, but due to consolidate after, that node isn't valid for consolidation, but other nodes that might have headroom are. And so you end up deleting old nodes to merge all of their pods onto the new node, which is not desired because you're disrupting more pods than you would have to if you did it the other way around. Is this something, I mean, we're getting a lot of plus ones on it in the AWS repo. Is this something other folks are seeing in other providers?
I don't think we've observed this yet, but it's possible that we don't have enough traffic yet to, accumulate enough statistics. So, don't count it out just because we haven't seen much of that.
Fair. All right, what I'm considering for it, and I wanted to get like, I wanted to gauge people's opinions on it, is I'm considering we just say that the consolidate after threshold applies to considering that node as being acceptable to other pods to schedule onto. So if like you have a new node, you won't consider it in other consolidation decisions. It's not just I won't consolidate the new node. It's also I won't consolidate onto the new node until the threshold is over.
Yeah, I don't fully remember the logic, but I do remember that we have some sort of a check to prevent pods from churning too much. I think we also looked at as part of this decision making, I think we also look at when the pod was last modified, and if it's just like very recently placed on a node, then we won't disrupt that pod. Um, so I'm just curious to understand why that's not preventing this. But I mean, technically,
Well, because you're consolidating from an old node onto a new node. So your old nodes are getting disrupted. The new nodes are fine. Like they aren't getting touched. You're turning a bunch of old nodes onto, or a bunch of old pods, onto a new node along with a new pod that's already on that. Does that make sense?
so these are pods that aren't new, like they have been running and they were created like a long time ago.
Yeah, or at least longer than the pods on the new node.
Hmm. I see. Okay.
It's essentially like they're using like like a glass full metaphor in their doc here you can see. So it's like you poured yourself a new glass of water that's barely empty, and then you grab your old one and you pour it into it, as opposed to just either filling up the old one or just like, and you're doing that instantly rather than waiting to see if the amount of water is sticky. It's not a great metaphor.
I'm
Okay.
going to, I'll go through this offline as well. I did think that there were things that we do to prevent this sort of scenario from happening, but like it's possible it's not preventing everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance. I am not super deep in the consolidation stuff yet. There's a chance that it is a misconfiguration here, but it seems like a use case that makes sense.
I guess with this, you're saying sacrifice savings for stability because I don't want to shift things, even though in theory, like I can delete the old thing, spread it across the two new nodes, and that will be, a higher savings because we're in theory the three nodes stuff would have been able to fit in two, but I don't want to do that. I want you to wait a little bit longer that the consolidate after is not in descriptive enough because I think it's a no node, so it would have been I guess that's slightly where I'm confused. Like consolidate after, I believe the counter starts. I forgot. Is it at the node creation? No, right? It's like at the evaluation of if it's a candidate, it evaluates after that time. So that in theory should have been the buffer to wait for that long before it consolidates that node into the others. I
Well,
could be wrong.
it's yeah, that's the thing is and that's why the consolidate after applies to the new nodes, right? So if you have a consolidate after of like 5 minutes or
Yeah.
something, your new node won't get torn up for 5 minutes, but the old nodes are well past that threshold, so they're fine to get torn up, even if tearing them up is just putting all of their pods onto the new node. And that's where the churn is coming from. And so
Right.
you're
Okay.
still considering the new node in consolidation. You're just not considering it as a candidate,
Right.
from my
Okay.
understanding.
If that's the case, then if consolidate after happens at evaluation of if this node should be a cat, like it needs to be available, like a node, let's say it's an O node, right? And if that O node is considered to be consolidatable for 5 minutes and then it consolidates, would that fix this also? Because then you're waiting for a longer period of time, in which case, if the new node that was slightly empty filled up during that time, then in theory, the old node wouldn't spill over to the new node because it wouldn't fit. And so it would wait a little bit longer before I attempt to consolidate.
Yeah, that would help.
Maybe.
The issue is if you have long-standing nodes, then there are going to be whatever threshold you set, even if it's like if you set it arbitrarily high,
Right.
then it's going to pass at some point for those old nodes.
Well,
And you
I
don't
guess,
want to have it never consolidate, if that makes sense.
yeah. I guess I need to look at the code a little bit because if consolidate after isn't based on the lifetime of the node, but rather how long a node has been a candidate for consolidation. Um, wouldn't that just that would even out the churn in theory, right? Like because if you waited long, like at time one, let's say that node, Carpenter thinks that if you consolidate that node, it can put the pods across the cluster, and then it waits 5 minutes, and then it's like, okay, in that 5 minute time, did it ever become no longer make sense for it to consolidate that node? Because the cluster has scaled up, things have scaled up, and I can't consolidate this node and spread that load onto other nodes and still save money. I stopped considering this node as consolidatable because after the 5 minutes from beginning of when I think it was consolidatable, which isn't the time of when the node is launched, it's simply at that point in time it was consolidatable, but I waited 5 minutes before I consolidated to delete the node because I know the cluster would change.
Oh, I think I know the confusion here. And maybe this is something I have wrong. I'm gonna have to go check the docs or the code. I was under the impression that consolidate after indicates how long after node launch can you consolidate. Is
You could
that
be
a
right
candidate
too.
for
I don't
consolidation?
know the answer to that too. I could be wrong. That's what I was like, I need to check also.
Okay.
I mean, I think, and this is something I don't know. I was just discussing this with someone like a few weeks ago. I think the key problem here is the way consolidation works today is it primarily cares about the cost, or it only cares about the cost. It does not have a way to factor in disruptions as part of its calculation. So at the end of the day, no matter how we do this, like if just a matter of time, if there is a new node which has space to accommodate pods from like a really long running node, it's still gonna consolidate that node and put those pods on this node, right? And most customers want that because I mean, if they are spending less money because these pods can be scheduled on a different node, then they would want that to happen. But in this case, for example, like they definitely care about the fact that there are some like really long running pods which are getting disrupted just for cost reasons. So I feel like the general AI here is to somehow make sure that consolidation is able to factor in disruptions in its calculation. So it's not just looking at cost, but also looking at the cost of disrupting some pods.
Yeah, I hear I hear you. I think we've been having the conversation a little bit here and there. I think that's a bit of a larger issue, um, and requires a bigger like configuration service, as customers will basically need to be able to like input their disruption costs for various pods and workloads and stuff. I think it's worth opening an issue for and seeing if there's a lot of desire for. I'm trying to do something a little cheap here to try to just see if I can't make it smoother, but we can take the conversation offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think that necessarily has to block this, but I was just curious, like how do we solve this problem without affecting customers who like really want their nodes to get consolidated if it's going to end up costing them less? But yeah, we can discuss offline. All right. Do you have anything else to discuss here, Derek?
Nope, that was it.
All
I
right.
need to drop too, so thanks everybody.
Thanks, Derek. We have the last thing on the agenda here. Renee, do you want to talk about this one?
Hey, yeah, sure. So I'm kind of working with a Linux Foundation mentee student. I'm from the Kubernetes UI SIG headlamp project, and a few people asked for a Karpenter plugin for their clusters. And so yeah, this mentee is working on it now, and they're about halfway through. And it's kind of up to the stage where it's usable for a few things. For example, it can do node class and node pool. Like you can basically look at the node class and node pool, and it links a few things there together. You can also like edit a few things. So I had a few questions about what type of data like each provider would grab, and if there's like some sort of, I think there's like a couple of common interfaces, but I'm not so sure how that is. And then after the discussion today about disruption budgets, I think that might be a topic for them to look at. But I was also going to ask if there's a possibility that we could maybe get some feedback, if anyone is interested, on what sort of things like they could work on next. So yeah, those are the things I would like to discuss. Anyone has any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very familiar with headlamp. I don't know if anyone else here has any thoughts. But it seems pretty neat, and I think like we should get the conversation going in the Carpenter Slack channel, maybe, and like just get feedback from other people.
Okay. How about the providers? Does each individual provider give a lot of information? And is there like a standardized interface for that, or?
Yeah, so I think so we have some like core CRDs that belong to core Karpenter, and then each provider defines their own node classes, for example. So even like they are defined as CRDs in the respective provider implementation, if that's kind of what you're asking.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to get some insight to if we need to be handling a lot of differences for each provider, or if maybe it's fairly the data structures are fairly standardized or not.
Yeah, I feel like the node classes could differ like significantly from provider to provider, but the Carpenter core objects would more or less stay the same. Um, I could point you to some of the current CRDs that we have, just so that you can take a look and see how they differ from each other.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that would be helpful.
This is probably where a unified doc site would be pretty helpful. See all the different like provider CRDs that are offered.
All right. Anything else on this?
No.
Sounds good. Thanks for bringing this up. And I think that brings us to the end of our agenda for today. Thanks everyone for attending, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.